In the last session, we looked at analysis. We took up a particular use case, and in that, we took up a particular scenario of adding an expert or adding experts, and we saw the structure by creating a class diagram and looked at the behavior by creating a sequence diagram, and we looked at the state behavior by building a state machine diagram, right? Now, this was the sequence diagram. This was the class diagram. And this was the state machine diagram. Yes. So let's keep all these things in mind when we start off with design, especially the flow. Now, when we are doing analysis, our major focus was on the flow, getting the flow right. Structure was secondary. But now, in design, our focus will be more on the structure, and then later on we look at the behavioral aspect. Okay, let's minimize all these things. Let's create a package. Okay, name it as design model, and let's push it down. Under design model, again we create a package, manage experts, and under manage experts, let's create a diagram, class diagram. Right now, for reference purpose, we'll keep shifting our focus from the sequence diagram to the class diagram. That is one thing. Second thing is I don't want to mess up my analysis model. So what I will do is I will not drag and drop anything from my analysis model. If at all I require something from there, I'll create it again. Now look at this. Training manager says he wants to add expert. Now, from the beginning itself, expert form will not be there, right? For him to talk to it. So there has to be something else. And when you're doing this, you need to be able to visualize. I've been focusing on visualization from the beginning. Visualization is a very powerful tool. So imagine you are the training manager. You're sitting down in front of the system, the box, right, the computer. And to start working on this, you will most probably double click on a particular application. Now, when you double click on that application, what should come up? Something like login. Right, but login we have called it as a prerequisite here. So it is understood that he has successfully logged in. So after login, what comes up? So some kind of a main form comes up. Main form comes up. Now what does this main form contain? It will contain some kind of a menu. This menu in turn will contain what? It will contain menu item. Yes. And one of the menu item would have or lead the training manager to the option of adding experts. So which means the expert form will come up when he clicks on a particular menu item. Right. So let's take this step by step. Now, expert form we know talks to the expert manager. So let's bring in expert manager. Expert manager in turn talks to subject at some point, talks to the expert at some point. We are not going to get into details immediately. We are just trying to get the idea of what are all the classes that are required. Okay, and remember, export manager is also talking to the HR application, right? If you don't remember that, it would be difficult. Um, so let's just go back to this use case diagram. You see here, it's talking to the HRMS and the email system, right? So now talking to an external system, right? Talking to an external system is going to be a little bit tricky, right? Because we don't know what kind of a system it is. So, since it can become tricky, let's treat it as a black box as of now. Let's create a package and name as HRMS access. Right now, remember this, although I'm using a package notation to represent it, but actually what I mean by this is that it is a subsystem, right? A chunk of functionality of the system. And when the moment I say a subsystem, remember the subsystem later on will become a component, right? For this, immediately what I have to do is define a interface. So let's define an interface for this. IHRMS access, right? Similarly, I require export manager is going to talk to the email system, right? Just make sure that you are sticking to the terminology. Okay, so let's again create a package. Let's call them as messaging service, right? And let's stereotype them. So what's a stereotype? A stereotype is a mechanism provided by UML which allows us to use an existing notation and provide additional meaning to that notation, or in some cases change the meaning of that notation entirely. Okay, now that we have done this, let's define an interface for this messaging service as well. Messaging service. Okay, now I think to begin with we have got enough. Now what will be the relations, what will be the relationship between main form and menu? Think of it like this: if I close the main form, what happens to the menu? It gets closed automatically. So it will be composition relationship where main form will contain the menu. Okay, what about the menu item and menu? Again, same thing. Now, some of the menu items, most of the menu items will lead to some functionality, but some menu items may in turn open a menu. Yes. Say for example, this entire thing is a menu on top. This is the main menu of the enterprise architect. Now and each one of this is a menu item. Each one of them is a menu item. If I click on this, what happens? I get n number of menu items. Some of these menu items may in turn have a menu. Each one of this is a menu item. So how do I show that? So basically, a menu item in turn will be associated to a menu. And since it becomes difficult to talk meaningfully, we need to provide a role name. Because without that, what will happen is we will be saying menu contains menu item and menu is associated to menu item. So it can become confusing. But if I provide the role name, so let's say here on the menu side, I say it is a sub menu. Now you notice it becomes easier to talk about it. A menu item will be associated to a sub menu. A particular menu item will create an instance of expert form, right? A menu item will create an instance of expert form, and this expert form in turn will be contained in the main form. Expert form will be talking to the expert manager. Yes. Now naturally, throughout the session of adding experts, it should be talking to the same instance. Yes. So which means it has to hold a reference to it. So let us say the moment you say reference, it has to hold. Where will it hold? It has to hold it in one of its attributes. So which means association. Expert manager talks to the HRMS access. So we say it depends on its interface. It talks to this messaging service, which means it depends on this. Now what will be the relationship between these? It will be, remember, HRMS is providing some service and that service is defined as an interface. And this expert manager will depend on this interface. So the relationship will be realize. This subsystem realizes this interface. Similarly, messaging service subsystem realizes iMessaging service. Okay, and I'll keep it simple for the moment and say expert form talks to subject and expert manager talks to subject and expert manager talks to expert. Now let's see the multiplicities. The main form will be associated with how many menus? Main form will have only one. And a menu will be having how many menu items? Menu will have, if you are going to give a menu to somebody, there has to be at least two. That means there has to be a choice. So 2 dot dot star. Okay. Now a menu item will be associated with how many submenus? A menu item may or may not have a submenu. So 0 or 1. Okay. A submenu will be associated with how many menu items? Only 1. Okay. Main form will be associated with how many expert forms? Expert form may or may not be there when the main form is existing. It's only when it clicks on that menu item will it come up. So it will be 0 dot dot 1. Now an expert form will be associated with how many expert manager? Again, first expert form will come up and maybe at a later point in time or after the creation of expert form will the expert manager come up. So 0 dot dot 1, and an expert manager will be associated with only one expert form. Okay, I think first cut we have got it in place. Now let's look at these two classes. Let's bring in these classes from the domain model: expert and subject. Okay, just for reference purpose, and we don't want it in stereotype icon form, right? So now we have these two. Now let's look at this subject class. Now here, if you notice that this class is not really cohesive, right? That means it is, taking care of too many things. So let's split this so that each class takes care of one particular aspect. So attributes, name, coverage, is active is with respect to subject itself. So is active is going to be Boolean. Initial value will be true. Is enabled is false. Okay, so that is subject. Now let's create another class. Let's name it later, and let's add the attributes. Number of questions added, right? And number of questions approved, number of questions rejected, right? With respect to the subject. Now with respect to the subject itself, number of questions asked, to ask in a test. Now this has something more to do with the test. These are statistical information. So let's create another class and let's add this here. Number of questions to ask, passing percentage, time allotted for test. Yes, time allotted for test by default, let's say it is 60 minutes. Passing percentage is 80%. Number of questions to ask is let's say 50. And similarly, we have split the expert class and taken out and created two additional classes to include the attributes related to reviewer and creator. Okay, now an expert will be associated with how many creator stats? One or more. And how many reviewer stats? One or more. Okay, So that is a little bit of more design for this particular scenario. I think we'll stop now and we'll continue in the next session. There is some more things to be taken care of. Bye for now.